ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends, welcome to this panel on mainstreaming anti-corruption across policies, portfolios and sectors, good practice and challenges. We know it's not easy. My name is Monica Kiria. I work as a principal advisor and deputy director at the UFO Anti-Corruption Resource Center, which is located in Bergen, Norway, where I coordinate UFO's theme on mainstreaming anti-corruption in public services and mainstreaming gender in anti-corruption. So I use this term a lot in my work. Maybe I even dream about it in my dreams. Yeah, so mainstreaming, I'm glad to say, was actually a term that the gender people came up with. It was first used at the 1985 World Conference on Women in Nairobi. And since then, it's become one of those terms we use a lot in development. And when it was first used, of course, it was about mainstreaming a gender perspective across all aspects of development policies and programs. Now, I did try to look, when did we first use the term mainstreaming in anti-corruption? And unfortunately, I couldn't find anything as exact as what I found for mainstreaming gender. But I think we can sort of guess that as anti-corruption has grown in importance since the 90s and the early 2000s, when the United Nations Convention Against Corruption was adopted, mainstreaming entered our language. It was already there in the development sector, so it's really, I guess, inevitable that we started to use it in anti-corruption as well. But what exactly does it mean when we use it in anti-corruption? It means integrating anti-corruption across all aspects of governance, not just governance, but all policies and programs in all sectors. It means that we no longer see anti-corruption as a standalone thing that only certain professionals or a certain aspect of our organizations does, but that it's woven into everything we do, into how an institution functions and how development initiatives are designed and carried out. It means that we acknowledge that corruption undermines development, undermines the very fabric of our societies and how our societies function, and it undermines trust, undermines well-being, undermines justice and equality. And so having acknowledged that, we then mainstream it across government agencies, civil society organizations, and the private sector. Because only with such a multi-pronged attack can we actually make progress. I could get carried away because I know, as I told you, I work in this area, but I don't want to, because we have assembled today quite a distinguished panel of speakers who will speak to you in a while. But more importantly, we are very pleased today to have as our keynote speaker, Mr. Martin Seychelles, Deputy Director-General of the EU Commission, Directorate-General of International Partnerships. You're very welcome, Mr. Seychelles. We are really pleased to have you because we know how important mainstreaming is in the EU, and you have been working in this area for a long time. You've been head of the Directorate of Foodstuffs and Chemicals at Malta Standards Authority since the early 2000s. You've been Director of Environment Protection there as well from 2006 to 2011. You've been Deputy Director-General for Health and Consumers at the European Commission since 2011, and Deputy Director-General for Health in the Health and Safety Directorate. You've been dealing with public health systems, pharmaceuticals, tobacco control, representing the Commission on the Management Board at the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control since 2011, between 2011 and 2020. And since coming into your role, we know that you're a champion of mainstreaming. And you're very welcome. We are looking forward to your keynote speech.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you also for inviting me to say a few words in starting off this panel. First of all, it's an honor for the European Union and for the European Commission to be here today among this large community of anti-corruption stakeholders. Now, we all know that corruption is a complex and persistent issue. It's a social, political, and economic problem which affects all countries and regions in the world. So that, I think, is the first thing we all have to recognize and admit. Corruption erodes democracy, it erodes trust in institutions, the rule of law, and it erodes the realization and enjoyment of human rights. It captures states, it undermines state legitimacy, but also tax collection and the delivery of public services, so a direct impact on citizens. It distorts functioning markets and thereby impedes all areas of sustainable economic, social, human development. Corruption, and this is something I think we should emphasize even more, is a key obstacle to eradicating poverty. Corruption affects in the hardest way the poor, or persons and groups in more vulnerable situations. It exacerbates inequalities. It disproportionately affects women, girls, persons with disabilities. And furthermore, corruption supports the existence of organized crime and therefore has a negative impact on security and stability at all levels. Now, if we look at various reports, global corruption indices put the European Union among the regions seen as the least corrupt in the world. But should we be complacent or happy with that? No, because corruption remains a key concern for people across the European Union. A large majority, 70%, of European citizens and companies perceive that corruption remains widespread in their country. And only a few, 30%, have the opinion that government's efforts to combat corruption are effective. So we still have a lot to do, even in the European Union itself. The European Union also, while it addresses its internal challenges, also fights corruption in its external actions with a holistic approach through a number of targeted instruments. And we do that in a number of different ways. First of all, the importance, and we support the establishment of a robust legal and institutional framework in line with international standards. Secondly, a strong commitment to public administration reform and sound public financial management, including, very importantly, the development of integrity and accountability frameworks. This also means the importance of capacity building for law enforcement and judicial authorities. It's not enough to have structures on paper. They also need to have the capacity to be able to exercise their much-needed roles. And then, of course, another pillar of our approach is the support to civil society, the media, whistleblowers, human rights defenders, as well as supreme audit institutions and parliaments in exercising their oversight and control functions. And last but not least, to prevent and fight corruption in specific areas, such as the environmental and resource management sectors. The fight against corruption is also addressed through our budget support operations, where the effectiveness of anti-corruption measures is maximized by a combination of top-down and bottom-up approaches that introduce reforms simultaneously. The human rights-based approach working principles guide all of our work, including meaningful and inclusive participation and access to decision-making, in itself a bulwark against corruption. The principles of non-discrimination and equality, accountability, rule of law for all, transparency, so very important, and access to information supported by data. The European Union is very committed to implement the UN Convention Against Corruption, and we are finalizing the first round of its implementation review. And we look forward indeed to the reviewer's report and recommendations. At the end of 2022, the evaluation of the European Union's support to rule of law and anti-corruption in partner countries was presented. and made a number of recommendations. I can just mention a few key recommendations which were made. First recommendation was to elaborate a unified and comprehensive anti-corruption framework. Another recommendation was to adopt a whole-of-delegation approach to foster the integration of rule of law and anti-corruption concerns across various policy domains and instruments. So this is where the mainstreaming comes in. And also another recommendation, very important, was that the European Union should ensure that engagement strategies on rule of law and anti-corruption are underpinned by solid and iterative political economy analysis, conflict analysis, and conflict sensitivity assessments. And we are implementing all of these recommendations and many others. I would like here to quote President von der Leyen, who declared in her State of the Union address in 2022, and I can quote her, when she said, "Corruption erodes trust in our institutions, and so we must fight back with the full force of the law." And she added, "I would like to focus on corruption with all its faces, the face of foreign agents trying to influence our political system, the face of shady companies or foundations abusing public money." So the following year, 2023, became an essential year for anti-corruption at the European Union. And a number of important actions followed. First, and only 7 months after the address of 2022 State of the Union, the European Union took extraordinary steps in the fight against corruption. The European Commission adopted an anti-corruption package with proposals for a range of measures, both national and global. So key elements are a joint communication on the fight against corruption and a new directive on combating corruption. The proposal modernizes the existing EU anti-corruption legal framework by, amongst other things, increasing corruption prevention, building a culture of integrity, and raising awareness. Secondly, anti-corruption was very high on the Swedish agenda when they assumed the presidency of the European Council in January 2023 and proposed Council conclusions. And in May, the European Council adopted conclusions on corruption as an obstacle to development. Adopting a whole-of-government approach to combating corruption to ensure that support reaches those most in need and is used in the most efficient manner. It is important, therefore, to incorporate a strong anti-corruption perspective in all development efforts. We should not view the fight against corruption simply as a standalone topic. That would be a failure. We need to mainstream in all other policies. And this is indeed how we can altogether best contribute to improving the everyday lives of citizens. Thirdly, and this was another important follow-up, the European Commission and the EU High Representative advanced the work with the Global Gateway, which is the new European strategy to boost smart, clean and secure links in digital, energy and transport sectors and to strengthen health, education and research systems across the world. Now, good gateway partnerships are built on 6 key guiding principles. First, good governance and transparency. Second, democratic values and high standards. Third priority, equal partnerships. Green and clean. Security-focused and also catalyzing private sector investment. Its core values are high-quality and sustainable projects, considering the needs of partner countries, and ensuring lasting benefits for local communities as well as the strategic interests of the European Union. But it also stands for promoting democratic values, good governance, and transparency. The Commission has set up an EU network against corruption with law enforcement authorities, public agencies, and representatives of civil society. And this network acts as a catalyst for corruption prevention and repression across the EU. With this, the Commission visualizes that the network will develop best practices and practical guidelines. We are also a community of practice, and this is an area where exchange of experience and expertise is so much needed. And in fact, one key task of the network will be to support the Commission to perform a corruption risk mapping across the EU, which is in the work right now as we speak. And this risk mapping will be used to develop a future EU strategy against corruption. So we are increasing our work together. We are sharing our expertise, both internally and externally, all of this in parallel. Now, in my Directorate-General, Directorate-General International Partnerships, we also produced an action plan to strengthen anti-corruption policy and practice, which includes a number of important elements. We are quantifying risks at country and local level. We are prioritizing countries of high-risk exposure. We are mapping out the priority sectors for those high-risk countries. We are developing sectoral-level guidance. We are proposing country-level and program-level actions. We are also, very importantly, increasing the capacity of EU delegations to understand and act on identified risks. We are using the Team Europe Democracy Initiative to facilitate joint actions with other EU member states in various countries. And we use other thematic actions to support priority sectors where possible. And of course, it goes without saying, in our DG, we work hand in hand with other parts of the Commission, with the External Action Service that also cover anti-corruption. We are currently finalizing new operational guidance on anti-corruption to provide more in-depth guidance to EU delegations around the world on how to work outside traditional governance areas, including sectors targeted by the EU's Global Gateway Initiative. The new guidance will assist EU operations to apply a common anti-corruption lens, irrespective of modality or sector, including but not limited to budget support. As we shift our approach, we also need to make sure that we are also shifting our attention to other new modalities of working. And this will help indeed with the mainstreaming of anti-corruption. We are also producing short sector guidelines, 2-pagers, that seek to outline in an operational way, helping people working in EU delegations to get a quick overview on how to incorporate a strong anti-corruption perspective in all our development efforts. And this is work which is very well advanced. Each sector in the guidelines is a standalone, and there are several links to different documents if there is a need for more information. We plan to launch these guidelines online, so they can be also accessed not just by delegations, but also by other interested parties as well. We are also setting up an anti-corruption help desk initiative, where the objective is to increase the knowledge base and to support EU delegations and headquarters work around anti-corruption in EU programming and decision-making. Highlighting the importance of incorporating a strong anti-corruption perspective in all development efforts. This is so important to ensure funding is used effectively, that it is targeting the right beneficiaries, and of course that we do no harm. There is also the Team Europe Democracy Initiative, which I have already mentioned, which focuses on anti-corruption, accountability, and the rule of law as one of its 3 core areas. And this network will facilitate the exchange of information, engage in strategic dialogue, collaborate on projects, and also create joint actions on thematic priorities. So the focus is indeed, as you can all see, on mainstreaming anti-corruption, which is why I was so pleased with the topic chosen for this panel. But of course, to mainstream, we also need to make sure that we have the right tools for the job. We also need to make sure that we are investing significantly in training, in capacity building, so that the guidelines are constantly being refreshed and updated according to need. Fundamentally, our objective is, and we will remain committed to this, to really emphasize the value of a robust anti-corruption view in development. We are at a key moment, as you know, in European politics. We will soon have a new College of Commissioners. There's a new parliament which has now been elected. And we will have also to use this moment to make all the necessary adjustments, changes, learn from past experiences, learn from others on what we need to do to ensure that resources continue to be made available for key development objectives. And this is not just about protecting our funding as donors. More importantly, it's about helping countries protect precious domestic resources. Ultimately, we all know that corruption is a big disincentive for anyone to willingly pay tax, for example. And we know there are big investment needs in the world. Corruption blocks all that, poisons all that. So we need to make sure that we're also helping countries set up the right structures, the right systems, have the capacity, and we can also learn from that, because there are many good examples around the world as well. So a lot has been done. Much more needs to be done on mainstreaming anti-corruption perspective. This is, like most things in development, not a sprint. It's a marathon probably which will never end, because we have to continuously update and improve. But we are definitely determined to work on this, and we see it as a fundamental pillar of our work. And whether we succeed or not on other areas will largely depend on our success, joint success on this as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seychelles. You can take a seat here on the panel. I especially liked your imagery of the fact that it's a marathon and not a sprint. And why I like that image is because a sprint involves fewer people than a marathon. A marathon involves all of us. And hence, lots of interesting panelists today. We are very pleased to welcome Mrs. Laura Ushkaj, Policy Officer, Rule of Law and Anti-Corruption at the EU Commission, Directorate-General of Neighbourhood and Enlargement Negotiations. Welcome, Laura. We are pleased to have you. Dr. Verena Zepe is Advisor on Anti-Corruption and Integrity at GIZ, the German Development Cooperation Agency. Welcome, Verena. We're also very happy to have Mrs. Molly Lien, who is Head of Controlling and Investigation at SIDA, the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. Welcome, Molly. We're happy. And then we have also Mr. Harald Mathisen from NORAD, Section for Governance and Department for Partnerships and Shared Prosperity, Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. Claudia Baez Camargo, you're welcome, from the Basel Institute on Governance, where she is Head of Prevention, Research and Innovation. And last but not least, Shreya Basu, Chief Country and Local Programs at the Open Government Partnerships, where she leads on OGP's engagement and support strategy for its many members. Welcome to all of you. And thank you, audience, once again for joining us. You can see we have quite a large panel. I think it's the largest I've seen so far in the conference. So I think it's going to be really exciting. We'll start with you, Laura. So you can tell us a bit more about the EU's mainstreaming. Mr. Seychelles already explained to us how important mainstreaming has become across the entire Commission and the entire European Union. And how the efforts that are being made, especially with the new EU directive. But could you tell us more about how mainstreaming has become important also in EU enlargement negotiations, and what the significance is of mainstreaming in that process?
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me? Am I connected? Yeah, okay, great. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks a lot, Chiara, for all your efforts and all the participants, and in particular my colleague Jeanette as well. I'm very glad to be able to talk to you today about the importance of the fight against corruption in the enlargement process. It has always been important, but it's increasingly important now, and we are trying also to mainstream corruption in that policy process, in this policy dialogue. Maybe just to recall what the enlargement process is. So countries that are willing to join the EU have to meet some accession criteria, so-called accession criteria, which we negotiate with the countries. Actually, it's called negotiation accession, but we don't negotiate anything because the criteria are the European standards, the international standards. We just make sure that those are applied, and if they're met in a certain way, then we can go to the next step of the negotiations and accession process. Those are around stable institutions guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and respect for and protection of minorities. Can you hear me? No? What happened? Now it's better? Okay, I will just try to keep this. So I will repeat the main, the core criteria, the accession criteria. Yes, it's okay? Yes. Sorry for that. So the first is stable institutions guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights. The second is a functioning market economy and the capacity to cope with competition and market forces within the EU. And the third is the ability to adopt and implement EU acquis and obligations for membership. Currently, we have 10 countries in the enlargement process. These are the Western Balkans, Albania, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Serbia. And we have also Turkey still in the enlargement process. And 3 new countries, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, that we like to call the trio. So if I refer to them. So particularly in the rule of law and governance sector, what we require countries to look at is the independence and impartiality of the judiciary, its accountability and integrity, also the accountability of government officials, and the political leaders' will to make corruption a priority during their mandates and in the policy making. During the enlargement process, the Commission, of course, helps the countries wishing to join to meet these criteria. In our, what we call our enlargement methodology, we try to cluster together fundamental sectors. So the rule of law. Sorry, I will use a microphone. Yeah. So we work around what we call the fundamentals, so the core fundamentals of replying to this accession criteria, which focus on the rule of law, security, fundamental rights, economic criteria, and public administration reform. And progress in this area is really essential to be met in order to proceed with the negotiations and start looking at other chapters. And in other words, the whole path of negotiations is determined by the progress made in these fundamental areas, which encompasses the fight against corruption, prevention and repression. We have also introduced the concept, as I mentioned, of anti-corruption mainstreaming, which means that for all these chapters, all these sectors like free movement of goods, agriculture, transport, unless anti-corruption risks and dedicated measures have been undertaken or addressed during the negotiations, we won't close that chapter. And once you've closed all the chapters, you're ready for accession. But unless the anti-corruption aspect has not been tackled, especially in vulnerable risk sectors, we won't close that chapter. So this is a new additional leverage we have introduced. we work in a comprehensive manner. As mentioned, we try to work on repression and prevention. We have partners, for instance, with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. We roll out in the Western Balkans trial monitoring to really see how adjudication of corruption, especially at high level, is undertaken. We work with OECD, Sigma on public administration reform and public finance management. We also work with civil society organizations to do more risk assessment, and tomorrow actually we're launching the national integrity system that was undertaken by TI in the Western Balkans. We are also looking at the infiltration of organized crime through corruption into a public and private life. So we are also helping the countries through international cooperation or cooperation with our EU agencies in justice and home affairs, such as Europol, Eurojust, and CEPOL. And also we are trying to look at specificities in some countries, like I mentioned the trio, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. We are asking also to look at measures to tackle, we call them de-oligarchization, so vested interest in public and private life. So we really try to have a bespoke approach, and while being comprehensive. And as it was mentioned, it's a long-term approach, but it's important to keep up the efforts and to try to raise awareness and efforts in each single sectors, and go out a bit of the classic approach, prevention and repression, but also looking at the sectors most vulnerable, and where also a large part of EU funds go, and accession assistance. So thank you very much. I hope I kept with time. Thanks for the time.
Yes, thank you. Don't worry about it, Laura. Thank you so much for that explanation. I think from what you've said and from what Martin said, we can almost see that mainstreaming is becoming a norm at the EU level. It's not just a legal or policy principle anymore. I think it is attaining the status of a norm. I see an academic paper there for somebody to write. But anyway, let's move on, and let's see how some of the EU member states are mainstreaming anti-corruption in their development assistance programs. Germany, we are very happy. Dr. Verona Zope, could you please tell us about GIZ, German Development Corporation's approach to mainstreaming anti-corruption in its strategy, the progress you've made, what insights you've gained on mainstreaming anti-corruption in development cooperation, what challenges and how have you overcome them?
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure whether I should also use the other mic, maybe, or okay, you can hear me. So thank you, Monica, and also thank you, DG International Partnerships, for organizing this very relevant workshop. And yes, so since March 2022, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development has a mainstreaming strategy. And it's binding for all implementing agencies, so not only for the ministry, but also for GIZ and also all the other implementing agencies. And I'm sharing today with you some of the insights of these 2 years of implementation. So also some challenges and also some solutions we are trying to get to overcome the challenges. The results I'm sharing with you today are part of a monitoring system, which is actually one of the main novelty of this mainstreaming strategy. Because before the strategy, we had different types, different waves of tracking, for example, the anti-corruption portfolio, or looking at how compliance has been implemented. But through this monitoring system, we actually have a real overview of how anti-corruption and integrity has been mainstream across all the levels. And when I'm talking about levels, I'm talking about the policy and strategies, but also the whole portfolio, so across the whole project cycle, and also, of course, at the national, international, regional, and multilateral level. And the mainstreaming strategy is called quality criteria because the ministry considers anti-corruption and integrity as a quality seal that makes German development cooperation actually more efficient, sustainable, and forward-looking. So let's go into the details of the results. So for the policy and strategy level, actually we are quite happy. We've seen really good results in the last 2 years. So we have looked at, for instance, documents like country strategies, country profiles, but also political economic analysis. We've looked at documents, preparatory documents for government negotiations. We looked at documents that record the government negotiations and also bilateral, the design of bilateral portfolio. And indeed, either anti-corruption and integrity were already integrated into these policies, or we were able to amend the policies in order, to include a good contextual analysis of corruption in the countries or in the sector. And in these specific, on the level of policies and strategies, we really think that crucial has been the fact that the ministry has released really specific guidelines that make pretty clear how to integrate anti-corruption in those documents. The same actually can be said for the project cycle. So we have really clear guidelines, for instance, on how to integrate corruption risk analysis in project proposals, but the results are not as positive as for the policies and strategies level. So, for instance, we looked at 219 project proposals that have been approved by the ministry in the 8 months right after the publication of the mainstreaming strategy, and coming from the 4 different implementing agencies in Germany. And so the results are not really completely satisfying, I have to say. So for instance, less than half of the project proposals entails a well-written corruption risk analysis. And when I'm saying well-written is because the guidelines are very specific. So they say the project planners have until 15 lines, for instance, to really get into the sectoral risk, the country risk. So if I can give like a very concrete example, when we saw risk analysis done by just, quoting the CPI, we would consider that as a really bad corruption risk analysis. And so we are at, I would say almost 50% of the project proposal. There's definitely room to improve. But then we see that 40% of the project proposals identifies the correct mitigation measures, so it's less than the half. And so we see that even though some of, they even managed to analyze the corruption risk properly, they were not able to identify the correct mitigation measures. And sometimes we see that project planners, for instance, make reference to standard compliance measures, and we don't consider that as appropriate because there's another part of the project proposal in which, of course, compliance standards come in. But we really require project planners to look into the sectors, and that's why to go beyond the compliance, the standard compliance rules. So the lessons learned in this case that guidelines are not enough. So we really need to speak to our colleagues. We really need to, learn the sector language, and to get into the sector, the different departments. And of course, there's need for training for colleagues. That's why we're also very, very thankful that U4 offers these great trainings on basics, but also on the sectoral corruption. And we will definitely keep on, looking at that. And another result from that comes from the analysis of the project proposals is that the mainstreaming strategy also introduced a novelty, which is like the projects not only need to look at the corruption risk, but they also need to make an assessment of the potential positive impact that anti-corruption measures have in the long term for the whole sector. So if you're implementing a project in the health sector, you really need to think about the whole sector. And in this case, we have only 1/3 of project proposal that really managed to include such an impact assessment. But I mean, we did not expect much more because, of course, the strategy was new, and we really looked at the 8 months after the publication. So for the last level, the national and international level. As for the national level, the mainstreaming strategy, of course, looks at the compliance system, the corruption management system, and requires the implementing agencies to have an updated system. And for example, for GIZ, I can say that we are updating our corruption management system for the field structures. In particular, we are looking at the reporting system, so we are trying to include also non-GIZ stuff. We are trying to make the reporting system more inclusive in the way that there has to be a focal person in every country that is responsible for compliance and needs to speak the local language. And also we are trying to look at different other barriers. So try to include, for example, people that do not know how to write and read and still can be able to report through the reporting mechanism. As for the multilateral levels, I don't really have results because unfortunately we're not able to reach to all of our colleagues working with multilateral organizations. So I think it's the idea is that the reality is really nuanced. So we cannot really use an approach that that can be applied with all the different multilateral organizations. We had an idea that. We have the idea that maybe we should really try to, tackle the different organizations in different ways. And I have a positive example. So we have been working with the Global Environmental Facility, the GEF, and since 2 years, and we really tried and managed in that in this area to include corruption risk analysis in the project proposals connected to climate financing. So just to conclude, because I know I'm time on, thanks, Jamie. So before I conclude, I just want to mention just two more things. One is that the quality criteria, anti-corruption integrity, is one of 6 quality criteria. So we are a bit competing with other topics like conflict sensitivity, gender, human rights, and so on. And we really value the use of integrated approaches, but I think, not most of the time, but many times really face the barrier of daily work and working in silos in the end. So this is maybe also a call for action among donors. It would be really good to find solutions together, also to have more of an integrated approach that also will spare work in the future. And maybe one last thing that can also be on which we can really work together and try to scale up. So GIZ is piloting a machine learning system to analyze documents on a wide scale, and the BMZ is also the ministry is also working on a solution that uses the big language models in order to monitor the implementation of the mainstreaming strategy. And I think this is really something technology is really something that could bring us together and make maybe things also easier for the future.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Zope. You really gave us a lot of examples, but some of the things that you mentioned really struck a chord with me and maybe with some of our audience. One was that in German Development Cooperation, you see mainstreaming anti-corruption and integrity as a quality assurance seal. And I thought that was really amazing, and it made me think, I wonder what the Development Assistance Committee evaluation criteria says about anti-corruption and whether it's one of the issues there. I think maybe someone in the audience knows and will be able to bring it up later. But it would be so good if it could indeed get in there so that all development cooperation strategies really focus on mainstreaming. Thank you so much. And now we would like to move on to Sweden's experience. Mrs. Molly-Lien, you've been working in development cooperation for a long time, for many decades, and you have wide experience with anti-corruption in development cooperation. Could you tell us what lessons SIDA has learned over the years on mainstreaming and how best to do it in development cooperation?
Thank you, Monica. Can you hear me? Yes. So thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be on this panel today. And I must say, listening to Germany, that I think we have similar experiences. A lot of what you just said rings a familiar bell with our experiences within SIDA. But first of all, let me just say, SIDA is a government agency working to create better living conditions for people in poverty and under oppression. And we have bilateral development cooperation with some 35 countries around the world, and we also support regional and global programs. And in addition, we also provide humanitarian assistance where needs are great and most urgent. So I will just say a few words about our journey as an aid agency when it comes to mainstreaming anti-corruption. When I lived and worked in Namibia in southern Africa at the end of the 1990s, so that is a long time ago, we did not speak about corruption at all. And when I think about that today, it seems very odd, to say the least. Luckily, things have changed, and today it is very different. Corruption is now recognized as a major contributing cause of poverty and closely linked to the lack of democratic rights around the world. So there has definitely been a major shift. In the early days, SIDA's anti-corruption efforts had a strong focus on protecting and safeguarding Swedish aid funds from corruption and making sure that the funds were used to achieve the objectives and for nothing else. And of course, this is still extremely important. I'm currently heading SIDA's unit for controlling and investigation. So we deal with these very issues on safeguarding Swedish funds, including investigating any suspicions of corruption or wrongdoings that we perceive information about. So this is still, of course, a priority and very important. But fortunately, we have also, during the years, widened our perspective to include corruption as a development obstacle. And I myself had the opportunity, together with many others within SIDA, to be part of this journey. And of course, this happened not only in Sweden and in SIDA, but at the global level, more or less at the same time. When more and more research on corruption became available, and I think we all realized the great dangers of corruption and the huge impact of corruption on development. And conferences like this one were actually instrumental in sharing this research and talking to peers and learning and sharing experiences, as well as cooperation within DAC, the Anti-Corruption Task Team, which is still very, very active today, within the EU, of course, and between member states. So gradually we realized that anti-corruption could not be a separate issue dealt with in isolation, but it had to be integrated into everything we do as a development agency. So how have we managed so far? Well, I'd say that we see a lot of progress. And I will give a couple of examples. I think like Germany and others, we are also, SIDA as a government agency, we are governed by strategies. So it's the Swedish government who decides which countries we should carry out development cooperation and what the objectives should be. And today, in more than half of these strategies, reducing corruption is an explicit objective. So they will tell us, SIDA as a government agency, to contribute to reducing corruption in partner countries if we can. And this, of course, is very helpful for developing our portfolio and to increase our profile in anti-corruption. We also provide support, what we call direct interventions, to support anti-corruption, for example, through supporting Transparency International local chapters, I think now in 11 countries, in addition to our core support to TI globally. We also within SIDA have an internal anti-corruption rule, which is compulsory for everyone within SIDA, and as well as in our embassies to follow. And it very clearly states that corruption, both as a risk, but also as a development obstacle, has to be taken into account in all SIDA's activities. So in fact, this is also part of the selection criteria, and we have to make a proper analysis, both of corruption as a risk and as a development obstacle in all the interventions before we sign an agreement with the cooperation partner to ensure that this has been taken into account. But I would like to add, just as you have seen in Germany, I think we have come quite far, but the quality in this assessment, we still can improve in some cases. And also in SIDA now, we have a very active thematic knowledge-sharing network specifically on anti-corruption for SIDA colleagues at headquarters, but also in our embassies. And we have a number of very active champions and colleagues who are promoting the continued development of on this agenda. And we also have a number of good examples, although there is not time to go into detail, on how we actually have integrated with our partners anti-corruption into the sector of education or access to water, etc. But, of course, some challenges remain. And I think, as was also mentioned here, development cooperation has many different goals. Anti-corruption is one of them, and because of that, it's not always on the top of the agenda. So we constantly need to encourage our colleagues and also in dialogue with our partners to keep these issues very much at heart of the things we do. And I think also very importantly, we as a development partner and a donor, we still need to increase our understanding of the political dimensions and the concrete drivers of corruption in the specific context where we operate. And of course, there is also, not only within our agency, but I think at the global level, and that is why we are still here in a conference like today, to discuss the optimal approaches to address corruption, right? And we are not sure about what they are always. Although we have a number of tools in our toolbox, it's not always easy to know what is the right way to go about it and how to sequence this. So, And also, I think, as a development partner, it's very, very important to manage expectations on our impact, actually. What can we realistically achieve? So there are still some challenges remaining. But we set our goals high, and we want to continue in this way and develop further. And when we speak about integrating anti-corruption in all the sectors that we work with, we work closely with EU and EU member states and other development partners. Our government puts a high priority on the health sector, but there are also other sectors that are very important, including environment and climate change. And furthermore, we also want to develop our portfolio when it comes to illicit financial flows, including, for example, better exchange of tax information and assets recovery. So in summary, a lot of progress that I think we should be really proud of, but more needs to be done. And Sweden and SIDA, we stand committed to work to further this agenda together with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Mo-Lilien. I have worked with SIDA for a long time, and I know how much you emphasize seeing corruption not just as a risk to the loss of important aid funds, but also seeing it as a development obstacle. And I also have seen how much commitment there is to knowledge sharing and, trying to break the silos that are so common in development cooperation agencies, but also how important it is to analyze the context properly. And I think a lot of the previous speakers mentioned that as well, that you can't just quote the CPI as a way to say, oh, here is our context analysis, this is how bad corruption is, and this is where we stand on the CPI, but really understanding how corruption is a development obstacle and how we can integrate all that understanding into different sectors and all aspects of development cooperation. So thank you very much. You also talked about SIDA and Germany's approach to funding multilaterals. And on that note, we are very pleased to have you, Harald, here with us, because Norway is one of the biggest funders of multilateral agencies, especially the UN system. And you're champions also of mainstreaming anti-corruption within your multilateral agency assistance. So we would like you, Harald, to tell us how you have been, as Norway, promoting the mainstreaming agenda in your multilateral development assistance, particularly in your support to the World Health Organization hosted global network on anti-corruption, transparency, and accountability.
Is the microphone? Yes, we're good.
Yes.
Okay. Let me start by going off manuscript. Your question is a bit narrow, so I'd like to start talking a bit broader, actually. So NORAD is a medium-sized development agency. It's Norway's development agency. We have a turnover around $5 billion a year, so it's on the medium-sized, large size. And actually, this panel is talking about mainstreaming, and mainstreaming is mandatory in all Norwegian aid. And we've been working on this topic for a long time. We have all staff, embassy staff, agency staff, have access to pretty solid training, also through U4. We've done a lot of guidance notes. We have our politicians making statements that cross-cutting is, we should be finding corruption everywhere where there's high risk. But we just did a run-through of our own portfolio, and honestly, you won't find corruption integrated many places, actually, even in high-risk countries and high-risk sectors. We could barely find 10%. So this is more, I would like to be honest about this. We are not doing particularly well, and I will hold it that many other agencies are potentially not doing very well at this. And there might be multiple reasons for this. Anti-corruption is just one of many competing cross-cutting issues that our staff have to deal with, and they're very, very busy. So gender issues, environmental issues, what have you not. So people are super busy and stretched, so anti-corruption comes on top of that. There's very little free money to do anti-corruption specific programming. So when we're asking people to do anti-corruption within the programs, they will often see because they are sector experts, they work on health and education, sanitation, etc. They want to spend those dollars on what they believe is the core. They don't want to spend it on governance stuff. So that's one piece of it. We could also say that yes, our politicians are saying the right thing, but the mid-level managers, to what degree are they actually pushing this agenda? So one could then ask, what is the appropriate spend on anti-corruption? Well, the correct answer would be, from an agency point, well, you do a risk analysis, you do a risk map, you do a mitigation plan. So the mitigation plan should be like more on par with the risk, and there you go. But we're not spending those monies, we're not seeing those monies being spent on anti-corruption. The previous U4 director, Peter Evans, has made the point several times in several forums, including places like this. He says that, if the risk of corruption or the leakage of your program or your sector is 10%, then you have a positive return of investment up to 10% of your programming. So it says something about the fact that we at least should be doing more. Now, Monica's question, you were hinting or giving me, how to do better. And that's the second part, so I'll try to answer that part as well. So, yeah, and I'm going to speak about health a little bit. So in 2019, I was sent to a meeting. I just returned from a mission, from a long stay abroad. And I was sent more or less the day after to a meeting in Geneva, where all the agencies who are working on corruption health, the multilateral health agencies, were gathered. And I thought I was going to be pretty boring because I'm not a health expert, so I would be the odd one out, and they wouldn't be listening to me. But actually, the meeting was put together by people within these agencies from what we can say are different constituencies within these agencies. That the Nordic countries have been pushing the agenda for anti-corruption onto the multilateral agencies for 25 years. And slowly but surely, in the kind of first and second phase of anti-corruption reform, much more attention was raised through the boards, and we got more action by the multilateral agencies on the control side of things. You know, it was a question of control, mining our money, more audits, etc., etc. So that one could say, and some have said that kind of that the agenda was hijacked at that stage. So there was no money available for preventive work, for system strengthening work, long-term governance work within these agencies. So that kind of fell down, and there was very little interest by countries. So we didn't get that part of the equation. So at the meeting that I was attended then in 2019, those two communities, the preventive systems guys and the control folks, came together and said we need to work together and learn from each other. And it sounded beautiful. So we totally bought into that. And at the same meeting were obviously a lot of great academics, great NGOs. So it was kind of a movement of people, a mini meeting like this, but it was only people who were into corruption and health. And they wanted to work together long-term, systematically, to raise kind of the joint learning of the issues and, you know, what could be the long-term solutions for anti-corruption in the sector. So that came together. It became a network. It's called GNACTA. You can look it up on the internet. It's a beautiful website. It holds all of these institutions now. The World Bank is on board. A lot of bilaterals are coming on board. If you in the room are interested, you are very welcome to come into the network. We need more mothers and fathers. A lot of great research is coming up. Some of it is to different partners, to U4, TIUK, other things. We're pushing early stage of a Lancet commission on corruption and health. Doesn't that sound fantastic? You know, bringing all the brains of the world together to get the evidence on what the problem is and the solution. So please join GNACTA. It's a great, interesting network. It's led by a secretariat at WHO. They're doing great work, and we're supporting, and we need more friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Harald, and thank you for expanding what I'd originally asked you and talking about the challenges you face within NORAD to mainstream anti-corruption with your sector colleagues. And, you know, yes, development workers are busy. We work a lot, but I think it takes time for this to get into people's systems and just to become part of their normal way of working. But hopefully we'll get there. I think we are making progress, aren't we, Harald, at NORAD? Yeah, some progress, slow and steady. Thank you so much. So now we move on to Claudia. You wear many hats, but one of them is that you provide technical assistance, and you have worked with the Swiss Development Corporation on mainstreaming anti-corruption in their operations in Albania. So I think now we've seen how it is with the development bilateral assistance agencies. Now we are coming to an example of how it actually works at the country level, and we are very pleased for you to tell us more about how that went.
Thank you, Monica. And is this working or?
Not very well.
Okay. Yeah, this is a short way to go about it. Okay, so thank you, Monica, and it's lovely to be here. I'm mindful of this ominous countdown clock we have right here, so I'll try to be as succinct as possible. So yes, we have been supporting SDC for many years now with many different topics. Amongst other things, we supported the drafting of the SDC Strategic Anti-Corruption Guidance that came out 2 or 3 years ago. And in that document, it's based on 4 pillars. I won't go into detail, but the point is that one of these pillars is precisely mainstreaming anti-corruption. So we did get this request from the embassy in Albania to actually go ahead and implement what does this mainstreaming look like. And what they wanted was all of portfolio mainstreaming. So they asked me to look at and work with 12 projects in their portfolio. So it was very interesting because these were very, very varied projects, varying from, supporting organic farmers, projects in the health sector, public finance management, vocational training. So really a very diverse group of projects. And essentially what I was tasked to do was, on the one hand, look at these projects and try to figure out to what kind of corruption risks would they be exposed that would be in any way threatening or compromising the ability of the projects to reach their goals. So this was one part of the equation. The other part was, okay, looking at these projects, are there any feasible and reasonable additions or steers which could potentially amplify the anti-corruption impact of the projects. So that's what we looked at, and it was really a very participatory exercise. I can talk about the methodology in the Q&A if there's interest in that, but really engaging with the project teams, and what SDC received in the end was a very long and substantive report, which included chapters for each of the projects with concrete recommendations, what could be done, what could be improved, but also recommendations for the embassy, looking across the 12 projects, kind of taking a step back and the bird's eye view. What does this exercise mean for SDC in Albania? What can be done as a next step? What can be further, scaled up, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to try to give you a few highlights to give you a taste of what the findings were. I think in terms of high-risk areas that were shared among projects, these were not really surprising. Procurement processes are always risky, so in this case, this was not an exception. Human resource management systems, especially appointments, tend to be very risky and prone to corruption, favoritism, and so on. What was very, very nice of this assignment was also looking at the success stories. And even in these two high-risk areas, some of the projects really achieved some remarkable results. For example, in terms of procurement, there is a project that is working on sustainable energy, and it's really a project to ramp up the energy infrastructure at the municipal level, which of course requires some significant procurement going on. And in this project, the team leader developed a very, very conscientious and thorough methodology to really prevent corruption from happening in these infrastructure procurements that were going on. And this is actually something that is, it is a methodology that uses the Albanian procurement legal framework, which is very important. It's not, using an alternative procurement mechanism, but rather working with the local systems. And this is one small example of a really meaningful achievement that then, can be scaled up. And this methodology that this project developed can be used also by other projects for SDC, but also for other partners in country. We also found some really interesting cross-cutting themes and cross-sectoral themes that I think were really interesting to see. I see one clear finding is that regardless of whether you're working in health or in vocational training or in PFM, building systems that have clear, transparent, robust rules, SOPs, is really, really an effective way to counter corruption. And it can be really simple things, such as creating nudges to facilitate how to adhere to the rules. So things like checklists, recurring agenda points, really easy, straightforward solutions found by the teams, but that proved to be really effective. And I think there's a lot to be learned across projects from each other, from this kind of ingenious solutions that they find. So I think for the embassy, some of the high-level messages were that really there is a lot of room to take a step back, to try to standardize and scale up some of the work methodologies and achievements that are, that the concrete individual projects have managed to secure. Harnessing complementarity. So, for example, when I was doing this assessment, there was a project on supporting CSOs that was in the pipeline. So, by doing this assessment, it was possible to pick up on topics where, hey, here CSO support could be really, really helpful to reinforce what's already being achieved by the project. So I think that some of the high-level lessons learned is that it is worthwhile to take a step back, have a bird's eye view across the portfolio, think what this means, and I'm very happy to report as my final word that now I'm working with the embassy to move forward with the recommendations and help implement this, across the portfolio, what it means, what can be scaled up, and what can be further explored. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia, and thank you for also pointing out that mainstreaming doesn't have to just be a top-down kind of initiative, because from what you've told us about your work in Albania, you have examples of some good practices from individual projects that can be scaled up. So it's like learnings from projects that can then be mainstreamed upwards and outwards across the whole development cooperation portfolio. Thank you. And now, yes, we still have a bit of time, so we'll continue. Shreya, we are very happy to have you because you can give us examples of how governments are mainstreaming anti-corruption and what approach they are taking. So could you please tell us about your work at the Open Government Partnership and share with us some example of this partnership model between government, civil society, and the private sector, and how mainstreaming is working through that?
Thank you, Monica, and thank you to our colleagues at DG INTPA for inviting us to be here and for our broader partnership, of course. So the Open Government Partnership was set up about 13 years ago now with the idea of making governments more transparent, accountable, inclusive, anti-corruption very much at the heart of the agenda from the beginning. And so now 10 years, 13 years in, what have we learned from the partnership? So the evidence really shows us that co-creation, when governments involve citizens, civil society, not just in the planning and design stages of reforms, but also in the implementation, leads to greater ambition, leads to stronger results. If there's one thing that I can leave you with in terms of what we have learned from 10 years of OGP, it is the important, crucial role of collaboration between government and civil society. And about a quarter of about 5,000 rough commitments that our 75 members have made to date have had transformative impact, and these range from areas of beneficial ownership transparency, open contracting, a lot of these things that we've been talking about this throughout this conference this week, but also in areas such as gender, justice, climate, and others. And you see this happen, and you see this possible even in places where the enabling environment for open government anti-corruption might not be the most conducive, or where you're seeing democratic backsliding. So to just give you examples, countries like Philippines, where we've had a challenging few years as far as the democratization agenda is concerned, you do see the power of government officials working side by side with civil society and others coming together, recognizing that governments are not monoliths on the one hand, finding different entry points at different levels and branches of government, and trying to pursue intersectionalities of different agendas. So when the door on anti-corruption closes, you knock on the justice door. And to that point, I want to say that what you said, DDG Martin, in terms of anti-corruption having to be pursued within a larger basket of reforms, that's really proven effective as far as OGP's experience is concerned. But of course, we recognize that's not enough, right? Because these are still transformative reforms that are too few and far between, certainly not mainstreamed or changing the culture of government as we had hoped we would accomplish. So as we took a hard look at ourselves at the 10-year mark to think about what the future needs to look like, there are a couple of things that we're trying to do as far as the mainstreaming agenda is concerned in our 2023-2028 strategy. One, we've issued an open government challenge calling on all our members to adopt whole of government anti-corruption strategies, but not ones that are simply led by an anti-corruption agency, but that truly cut across branches and levels of government. And within that, thinking about the interoperability of different anti-corruption reforms. Before we get to mainstreaming in sectors, we have to recognize that all the procurement reforms, all the beneficial ownership data, the whistleblowing data, if that doesn't join up, you don't get to see the results of anti-corruption. It gets harder to make the case for mainstreaming. The second, of course, is we are calling on our members to, we are seeing countries make progress towards this. So we have countries like Armenia, Kenya, North Macedonia now starting to take strides towards pursuing this interoperability of different anti-corruption approaches. The second, of course, is mainstreaming anti-corruption within national development priorities and plans, within sectoral strategies, building upon the good experiences from the Infrastructure Transparency Initiative, the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative. This has been done. The tools are there. But how do we now take it forward to health, education, and other places? And again, we are seeing pockets of reform, particularly of the pandemic, where we did see some measures to make information about, health systems, doctors, availability of PPE sets and all these other measures starting to become more open, nearly not quite, of course, at the scale that is required. The third, I would say, and Monica, like you, we dream about mainstreaming and work towards it as well. And one of the main things that I think we would like to see is mainstreaming the idea of civil society and citizen engagement in this overall agenda. I'm sure civil society colleagues in this room are very used to being in consultations that are one-off exercises that are upstream at the planning stage. But what we see is the powerful example of what happens when citizens are involved, not just in the planning stage, but also downstream when you're looking at auditing, for example. So to again give you an example from the Philippines, you have the Supreme Audit Institution there, the Commission on Audit, involving citizens in monitoring health, infrastructure, water and sanitation projects to identify, does the road exist? Where's the leakage happening? Does the hospitaling exist? And these are resulting in real savings and changes in government policies as well. Again, too few and far between, and we would hope that this is not only taken up by more members in terms of how citizens and civil society are engaged throughout the policy cycle, if you will, but also in the way in which development partners see the role of citizens and civil society within their operations. I particularly like, Harold, your lack of enthusiasm for where we have reached in terms of the mainstreaming agenda and the resourcing available for it, right? The 10% figure really struck with me, because if I have to say one last thing, it is we have to talk about mainstreaming funding for anti-corruption, even as we're talking about mainstreaming anti-corruption strategies and policies. And too often at the country level, you see that the governance portfolio sits as a parallel to the others. And it's individuals trying their very best, but the resources simply don't exist to ensure that the programs incorporate citizen and civil society engagement throughout the policy cycle. So that's what we are hoping to see come out of OGP, and we are glad to see there are members that are responding to this call.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shreya. It's very heartening and inspiring to hear about the work that the OGP is doing and how mainstreaming is happening with your different partners. Thank you all, our panelists. We had I'm sorry, we don't have a lot of time for questions, but I will take just 2 questions. I'm so sorry, don't hold it against me. I'll take one from the left side and one from the far right. Yeah, that's how I'm gonna do it. So the lady on the left, and then the one who's to the far right here. Very arbitrary. And yeah.
Thank you. I'm very lucky that nobody else wanted a question here. My name is Marcia Hofs. I want to throw in a pinch of negative consequences that all of this mainstreaming has brought, but I do hope to be able to show some recommendation or a call for action for the donors to take into consideration. So one of the negative consequences I've seen with all these anti-corruption, I would say, safeguards that donors and funders have put in place is that the funding, it stops funding from going directly to local organizations. And in efforts of localizations, which are also very important, also for accountability mechanisms we've discussed, I have directly seen in previous positions I've had, where in my portfolio I had to ensure localization of efforts, where donors didn't directly want to support these initiatives with local entities, then came to me as an international organization and asked, oh, but can't you manage the money and then they do the implementation? That's a lot of money lost in international organization that could have gone directly to those local entities. And so that's one of the direct consequences I've seen, is because these measures are strong and good, but a bypass organizations have found is by actually funneling it through entities that do answer all these standards, which are sometimes impossible to have, 5 years of audits, or all these other financial management system that costs money for these local entities as well. So maybe the recommendation of the call to action is, how can we transfer those learnings, these safeguards, these policies directly as well to local entities? A fund for annual audits for civil society organizations to be able to hold, the criteria you need to get funding from a different organization. So a pinch of salt, but I also as well a call for action. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any of our panelists want to take that while the microphone moves to the other side of the room? Yes?
So I just wanted to react on that. Thank you very much for raising that very important point, because this shows the importance also of not approaching this with what I would call a defensive attitude. The objective here is not basically to only work with entities, with organizations that we know are safe. Because if we do that, we're in the wrong business. I mean, we work in contexts which are often difficult, which are often challenging. That's why we're in development. So I think we have to make sure that we are investing in the entire ecosystem. So the examples you mentioned of things that could be done to help build capacity, we also have to make sure that while we are not compromising on the objective, which is to fight and eliminate corruption as much as possible, we also look at our procedures, because there may be different ways of getting to the same result, and we should choose the ways that are least onerous on our partners. But the building of capacity is a very important thing, and we need, I think, to think carefully to really create and have, and also as part of our projects, the building of capacity in our partners around the world. So this is a very valid point. Thank you for making that.
Thank you. Next question, please. Yeah, there was the lady in white. She was the one, yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I win the lottery here. Hi, I'm Ara Marcen. I work in Transparency International Defense and Security. I just wanted, as one of key sectors where corruption is quite rampant, and I wonder if it's that in your radar and in your plans to put a collective spotlight focus on corruption in defense as it's blocking development, many of the initiatives that we all work, and it's just really crucial for the future that we want, no? Peace and justice and healthy societies. Thank you.
Very important question. Any takers? Yes, Laura.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, it's a very important sector because so much budget goes into it. So, of course, the corruption risks are there, and at DG NEAR level, we have been engaging with the NATO in the context of their building integrity program, which looks at in particular raising transparency and accountability in the defense sector. And also in the context of our accession negotiations with enlargement countries, we have a so-called Chapter 31, which encompasses defense and security policy. And also there we try to engage with our partners to look at where are the risks and how we can support them and how we can keep that high on the agenda.
Thank you. I think that it was really great that we had the EU here, because I don't know that development cooperation agencies deal with defense and security a lot. You know, it's a bit marginal to our work as NORAD and SIDA and SDC. We don't normally, but it's great to hear that the EU is dealing with that. I'll take one more question, because we still have a bit of time. Now, it's very tempting for me to pick somebody I know. For that matter, I'll pick somebody I don't know. Yeah. So if you know me, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Angie Schleller. I'm a youth advocate from Lebanon in anti-corruption and development. So obviously we have a lot of development cooperations, even competing for the same topics in anti-corruption and development. But hearing you talk more and more, and even back in Lebanon, it seems that the process of mainstreaming anti-corruption policies, especially sectorally or even in terms of within public administrations, it always circles back to the questions of basic efficiency and just going back to guaranteeing transparency and accountability. It's as simple as that. And I do wonder if we're overcomplicating a bit in creating a kind of niche market that maybe would have otherwise been resolved by just paying more attention to basic processes. And somebody mentioned SOPs as a way to improve that. So it seems like if we direct our attention to these basic day-to-day activities and maybe just better auditing, then that would be a relatively more effective and accessible approach, especially for countries like Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone? SIDA, Germany?
Yeah,
overcomplicating things? Germany, you even are thinking of using AI, or you've already started?
Yeah. I can take on that.
Okay.
So thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, in the end, it is true. So even when we talk to our colleagues about the mainstreaming strategy, the first thing we say, and I forgot actually to mention that, it's a lessons learned we have. It's the first thing we say is actually we actually have done so far everything that is in the mainstream strategy. Basically, we just call it maybe in different ways. So it's not, we don't want to scare our colleagues, to add another layer of work or what. But it's just maybe a bit the way of looking at it. And because you also mentioned in gender mainstreaming, right? I think it did actually change something in the mindset of people, because you start, thinking every time whether you really include. You're really inclusive in your projects. And actually, we aim to do the same for the anti-corruption, that they don't even need the guidelines anymore at some point. They will really have this transparency, which you said, which is, anyway, something that we should assume that it should be for granted. That's what we want to get. But I think to get there, we really need, as a starting point, these guidelines and all these layers which sound a bit bureaucratic, maybe, as you said, but yeah.
Thank you. Any other interventions? I'll take Nora, then the EU, and then SIDA, if you have anything to add. Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes. No. Harald first, then the EU, and then SIDA. Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you for the question or the comment. No, I think you're right. At least we need to make sure that kind of mainstreaming doesn't become like a shallow niche that runs kind of on its own, but it needs simultaneously to be kind of integrated in kind of the core governance reforms of the country on PFM. We talk at this conference, you'll hear a lot about BO, procurement reform. So these national style reforms with the big money, with the World Bank, etc., they need to be integrated in whatever is done at the sector level. So it's not something small on the side, but it's actually core government business, and you need to be positioned in that space. Thank you.
Thank you. EU, where the timer is blinking.
Yes, just a very short comment. This is a general comment on mainstreaming in general, because we mainstream a lot of horizontal topics. Yeah. This is one of them. Issues around gender, inequalities, etc. It's always the same issue. the point we're trying to make here is that it's not adding another layer of complexity. It's about making sure that in the design of projects, as upstream as possible, one does the proper analysis of risks and opportunities and addresses them at that stage. Because all too often, if these horizontal issues are left as an afterthought, we try to retrofit when the project is basically baked, okay? Then we have either the risk of an ineffective approach or tokenism. I mean, I remember when I was involved in designing projects on environmental performance. I mean, you used to get submissions, and we put in a PV panel on the roof, box ticked. That is the kind of thing you want to avoid. So the answer to this question, as it is for any other type of mainstreaming, is to make sure that this thinking, analysis, happens in the design of projects. If that's the case, then you stand a very good chance of having a successful project. It's not just another layer which often can lead to the perception or reality of a bureaucratic exercise.
I don't know that we have time. I'm very sorry. We have only 30 seconds left, and I know that it's a topic we could go on and on. We need to write a book about it, right? We definitely could. And thank you all. Dear audience, for joining us. I hope you found it stimulating. I hope you've learned something. And I look forward to interacting with many of you. And we can continue to discuss it and to learn from each other. Thank you very much for joining us.